Hey guys, just the other day I was on YouTube and I was listening to someone talk about why they left the faith in Christ, why they stopped believing in Jesus as the Messiah. One of the reasons was that they found the Gospels to be unreliable. I thought it was very interesting. I would love to have been able to sit down with this person and have a conversation and talk about what they thought was the evidence that made the Gospels unreliable. What they said is that the Gospels became propaganda to promote an agenda that the disciples had. That it wasn't even really recording the history of Jesus, and that we couldn't trust anything that was in the Gospels to actually be what Jesus said. As I listened to that, I just thought of the thousands of counter arguments against that, but I also had my heart broken because I thought there are people who actually are believing this, who are walking away from truth because they're saying, you know what? Maybe I can't trust this. Maybe we can't look at the Gospels. So what I want to do is I want to take a moment and take a look at the Gospel of Mark and give you just one line of evidence that helps you stand firm on your faith. And if you're wrestling with your faith, again, I would just love for you to reach out, send me your questions, and let us look and examine together. One of the beauties of the Christian faith is that we are encouraged to investigate it. In fact, one of the beauties of Mark chapter 8 is that it's been halfway through Jesus' ministry, or maybe even longer, before Jesus finally turns to the disciples and says to them, "Who do people say I am?" They say, "Oh, a prophet." Oh, they say, "Some John the Baptist risen from the dead." And then Jesus looks and says, "But who do you say I am?" They say, "Well, the Christ, the Messiah." Now, what's interesting is that Jesus has not asked them this question up until now. Why? What's he been doing? He's been giving them evidence to validate his claim. He's been giving them evidence to validate that he is the Messiah. You see, our faith isn't built on superstition or wishful thinking. And certainly, if you look at the Christian faith, to say that it's, a comfort for the weak-minded or a crutch for the weak, that's ridiculous because Jesus calls us to do really hard stuff like deny what we want most to get what we really want most. He invites us to be persecuted, to endure ridicule for the sake of the gospel, which isn't really a crutch for the weak at all, but rather, hey, come on the adventure with me if you're strong enough, if your faith is strong enough to make it. So Jesus says to the disciples, "Hey, who do you say I am?" And they say, "Well, the Messiah, the Christ." Now, they had this amazing moment in Mark 8, verse 27, all right, through 30, where they claim who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. Now, that could be propaganda. It could be, they wrote that in. The disciples got it right. Correct? Now, there's a principle when historians study text to say, is this real? Can we trust the writer, the author of this text from a historical standpoint that they are writing actual history? One of the many ways that historians and people who study ancient texts test is it's called the principle of embarrassing testimony. Now, what we mean by that is did the author include testimony in the written document that is embarrassing, that makes them not look like they are the wisest people or the best in the group? Or are they always the hero? Are they always supernaturally smarter than everybody else and better than everybody else? When we look at Mark, we see over and over again, in fact, in all the Gospels and the New Testament, where the disciples are dim-witted, they don't get it. They run away when Jesus is taken prisoner. They flee. Women are the first ones at the empty tomb, not the men. The brave men are where? Hiding for fear in the upper room. Again, over and over again in Mark and in all the Gospels, the main characters who, again, are alleged to have wrote propaganda to fix up a new religion that they had no reason to invent and no gain for inventing it, but yet that's the critique of the Gospels. Now, here's what I want you to see. I want you to take a look with me at Mark 31. When we talk about the principle of embarrassment, this is a huge one. It says that Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man, that's a term used for Jesus out of Daniel 7, must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, chief priests, scribes, and be killed. After 3 days, rise again. Now pause just for a second. We always say, anytime someone can predict their own death and resurrection and pull it off, we should do whatever they say. And then he says, all right, after 3 days, he's going to rise again. After all this, Peter pulls him aside. Peter, Jesus, come here, Jesus. Over here, just you and me, Jesus, you can't talk like this. Like, this whole you're going to die stuff, that's, first of all, it's messing up the groove of the group. Like, we're all for feed people, walk on water, heal demons. We don't mind hiding from Herod because he's out to get us. But Jesus, you can't be talking and telling people like, hey, you're going to die. That can't be the message you give people. Everybody's going to go away, right? Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Then Jesus turns and rebukes Peter. By the way, the word rebuke is the same word Jesus used to silence the demons previously in Mark. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Now, this is an amazing moment where, again, if they're making up a story, like, hey, you remember Peter, the guy who's kind of the leader of the church? You remember the story when Jesus called him Satan? Like, that's not something we're putting in the Gospels. That's not something we're going to set in there. If we're making up a story, we're going to say, hey, let's make ourselves look really good. By the way, history suggests that Peter is dictating the Gospel to Mark, the author. And you say, well, who's Mark? Well, that's a great question. Again, the reason that we trust that Mark wrote the Gospel is because why else would the church invent him as one of the names on the Gospel, right? Let's name him Peter or the Gospel of John or one of the other disciples. That's a big deal. Even Thomas would be better, but Mark, who's Mark? He's not even one of the disciples, right? So the idea that this is propaganda, that you can't put your trust in it, one of the places that, again, historians say, is this real? Is this true? Is it trustworthy? Is this idea of embarrassing testimony. There's nothing more embarrassing than having Jesus turn to you and call you Satan. Plus, the idea of Jesus inviting people to take up their cross. Again, we live with that in our culture and we go, yeah, take up your cross and follow Jesus. Yay, but we miss that Jesus is saying, take up a device of torture that is repulsive. That you all have seen someone die a gruesome death on. They hang on the cross for sometimes weeks. Sometimes they hang on the cross for days before they die, but the body's left up there for weeks. Jesus makes a statement that everybody in culture would have been like, whoa, Jesus, you can't say that. Nobody wants to take up their cross and follow you. And yet this is what he says in the very next verse. He says this, if anyone wants to become my follower, let them deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. So today you might say, hey, take up your electric chair and come follow me. Well, we get that means, hey, that there is a spiritual death and then a resurrection with Jesus that we experience. But again, the reality and the testimony, the embarrassing testimony, the difficult sayings of Jesus remind us that these are real gospel stories giving us real history about real events that the disciples did not try to make themselves look better in, didn't try to gloss over the times where they didn't get Jesus. They said, here's the truth of the gospel as it happened. It's historically reliable. I hope that you are willing to investigate, research your doubts. The beauty of doubts is that they push us to examine it better, to say, hey, is this really real? And we can all have doubts. God doesn't get frustrated with our doubts, but I encourage you, research the gospel. Test it, examine it, go over it with a fine-tooth microscope. It's going to be reliable. And, hey, send your questions in. We'd love to hear more. Have a great day, guys. From Aaron and the Gospel of Mark, have a blessed day.